If you want to improve battery life on the Motorola Edge 70, you can, for example, open Settings. Next, in Settings, we can proceed to Battery Settings. And once you are here, we can start by going, for example, to Battery Saver. Of course, Battery Saver doesn't have to be used all the time, but we can turn it on whenever we need to keep the battery for as long as possible because, for example, we are in a situation where we cannot charge our phone. Of course, you can also switch to maximum battery saver in order to, to do exactly that, to maximize the additional time that you can get by switching into this mode. We can also go to settings over here in order to, for example, disable 5G, and you can also choose essential apps that will be accessible in this maximum battery saver. We can also go to schedule and reminders in order to, for example, enable the automatic battery saver, so it can be enabled and disabled at the specific percentage. And you can also reduce battery drain when inactive, so this is of course recommended to use. Besides that, we can go to battery usage in order to find out which apps use the most battery at a given time at the selected period or time frame. So at least you will know exactly which apps you can of course try to avoid or maybe use not so much, or you can limit something for these batteries, because if you go into these settings, then of course we can, for example, choose to not allow these apps to run in the background. Adaptive battery is of course recommended to keep enabled, and it is recommended to use some form of battery protection. You can of course try to use the smart schedule, which will start working after some time. Of course, the phone needs a little bit of time in order to figure out the charging patterns and in order to optimize the battery health. But you can also use the manual schedule, which allows you to keep the battery so with this option you are able only to charge to 80%. So of course we can switch to always in order to always have that 80% limit, or you can switch it to specific hours, so you can only charge to 80%, for example, at night if you choose the night time over here. If you, of course, charge at the time. There's also the charge booster in case, for example, you don't want to use the fast charging option, then you can turn it off. And over here we can also manage apps that are running in the background, for example, if you want to do so. But besides the battery settings, what you can also do is manage some display settings. Like, for example, adaptive brightness will be really helpful over here. Dark mode can be helpful as well. These options, of course, individually maybe do not change that much, but if we combine everything over here, then of course we can get slightly better battery life. And of course we can also create a schedule for the dark theme so that it can be automatically enabled and disabled at a given time. Of course, I understand that you might not to switch the refresh rate, you probably want to use as much as possible, and that is of course totally understandable, but since we are talking about improving the battery life, I also have to mention the 60 Hz refresh rate, because of course this will definitely lower the battery consumption. And of course, if you use, for example, like the attentive display, this also has an impact on the battery life. But besides these options, what I can also recommend you to do is to go to location, and over here, of course, we can go to location services, and you can check Wi-Fi and Bluetooth scanning. These options can be a little bit helpful with saving the battery life. They don't have to be enabled all the time, so you can turn them off over here and only enable when it is actually necessary to do so. And that is essentially it. Of course, if you use stuff like animated wallpapers, this also has an impact on the battery life. If you use some features like, for example, always on a display or actually sleep display, which is in lock screen settings over here. So if you use like the sleep display, for example, of course, this also has an impact on the battery. And I also have to mention things like the Wi-Fi, mobile data, Bluetooth, NFC, and so on and so forth. And what I have to say for these things is that, of course, I'm not advising you to not use them at all. But for example, what you can do is you can use these features only when you actually have to use them. When you connect, for example, a Bluetooth device, or when you are at home and you actually do have a Wi-Fi connection. If you are outside and if you don't have Wi-Fi outside, then of course and there is no need to use Wi-Fi, so you can turn it off temporarily until you get back. Same thing can be said about Bluetooth, of course. So if you don't have any Bluetooth device connected to your Edge 70, it is just recommended to turn it off, because this will definitely help you save the battery a little bit. And that is pretty much it. And also I have to mention something about charging. Nowadays batteries are built in such a way that the optimal charging is between 20 and 80%, hence why we have these options that limit the battery to 80%, because usually this is the perfect spot for batteries. I mean, the best way to charge them, essentially. So the ideal percentage is between 20 and 80. You stop charging at 80, you start charging at 20, and this can also improve the battery life on your phone. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching, leave a like and subscribe.